welcome to Soccer 101. My name is Daryl Grove, and sitting across the table from me, it's Taylor Rockwell. Hello.
Hello, my friend, and today we are here to talk Pele.
I've heard of him.
I imagine you have, because he's one of the best players of all time, unless you're Diego Maradona, in which case you don't rate him. But what is it about him that makes him so special? Why do people who maybe don't know much else about soccer, or really anything about soccer, they know that name Pele?
Yeah, my wife's father knows the name Pele, probably couldn't name another soccer player.
That sounds about right. And so while other players from the 50s, 60s, 70s have maybe faded from our memories a little bit, Pele kind of stays front and center in our collective soccer minds.
I mean, you said that. I've got a Vava poster.
I'm sure you do. So we've done the research. We've watched the footage. We're now here to determine why exactly he is so special, why he stays in our minds to this day.
Okay. So we're just going to trade back and forth.
I think so.
Our reasons why we think Pele, basically why is Pele such a big deal?
Yes, pretty much.
Would you like to? I feel like you've done more research than me. I'm looking across the table. Your notes, there are more bullet points than I have bullet points.
There's a lot of bullet points.
So why don't you go first so that you can get some of yours done?
Sure. I'll start off with, and I think what we're striving to do here is maybe not tell like the history of Pele. We're not doing a biography.
No. We're not going to say he was born here and then he had this for breakfast.
No, we're not. And I'll also say this will come up a lot in mine, but a quick disclaimer is that like we're also, I at least was trying to kind of remove some of the mythology from Pele.
Yeah.
Because with him there is so much storytelling that it's difficult at times to figure out what exactly is true, what exactly is myth.
Some of the storytelling comes from Pele himself.
It does, but one of the things he definitely did not make up was that Brazil won the 1958 World Cup, and that's where I want to start, because it was the first time they ever won the World Cup, and that's a very important thing to remember. There's a great quote from author Armando Nogueira, who said, "The first championship is like a first kiss, one never forgets." He also added, "There's a certain aura, a certain mysticism about that first victory." And I think that is very true, and that pertains to Pele as well. His first World Cup as a 17-year-old, to become this like front and center story of this youngster who came through, didn't start, ended up starting, ended up scoring, ended up becoming this pivotal figure that he played such an important role in Brazil winning their first World Cup, I think is why he stays, like, or at least initially is connected to the brilliance of Brazil.
And then I kind of joked about Vava at the top of this show. I think he scored more goals than Pele at that tournament, but Pele scored more memorable goals, right? So there's what he did for Brazil, but then if you think that TV stuff was kind of beginning in the 50s, I'm sure we'll get more into media and how that relates later. But Pele scored two incredible goals in that World Cup final. You know, the one where he chests the ball, then he lifts it over a defender's head, then he takes it on the volley on the other side. Imagine seeing that all around the world, and you're some guy in England in 1958 watching, like, you know, the brief footage of the 1958 World Cup final. You immediately will be like, who's that guy?
Yeah.
I'm going to remember him.
And that's worth noting that, 58 was the first, I think, like international television coverage of a World Cup. That probably factors into it too. Yeah. And it's also when we get, by all accounts, our modern understanding of Brazilian soccer. It starts with this 1958 team. So it's lively, talented, energetic, enthusiastic, fun, skillful, but goal scoring. All of it goes back to that 4-2-4, but all of it also goes back to Pele.
Oh, okay. I've got a similar note about 1958. My note is, my reason that he endorsed so much, maybe especially in Brazil, is in 1958 he redeemed Brazil.
Yep. Because
if you don't know your Brazilian soccer history, in 1950, when Pele was just a wee lad, if he was Scottish, there was the famous, what's it called? The Maracanã? Maracanã, which is the agony of the Maracanã.
Yeah, you've got that. I think you've got the unfortunate final as well as another one.
So what happened is it wasn't actually a World Cup final, right? Because the 1950 World Cup final was in a weird group stage format, but the final group stage game was Brazil versus Uruguay at the Maracanã, which is a famous Brazilian stadium. All Brazil had to do was draw, and they were world champions for the first time. Brazil lost. And it was this national disaster. It's very similar to the 7-1 defeat to Germany in many ways. And then 8 years later, this teenage Pele is leading the charge as Brazil actually win the World Cup and redeem what happened in 1950. I want to get into that self-mythologizing thing as well, because I've seen Pele tell the story of watching his father watch the 1950 World Cup final, his father start crying, and Pele say to his dad, I think he was, 9 or 10 years old, and he said, "Don't worry, Dad, I'm going to win the World Cup for Brazil."
Yes.
Truth or Pele's self-mythology?
I mean, I feel like it can be both, which is that I feel like any child who, if their father's crying because his favorite football team, American football team, has just lost the Super Bowl, that child who's 6 might say, like, don't worry, one day I'll win you the Super Bowl. And little kids make lots of claims. And he might also have said, one day I'm going to be the lead singer for the Beatles. That seems less likely. But, like, maybe you remember those because of what happens later on in life. So he may well have said that, but I doubt it was this, like, clarifying incident of I'm going to go out and play every single day and I will one day become victorious, and it was his life's ambition. It was probably like, don't worry, we'll probably win it someday.
All right, we're not going chronological.
We're not, but I would like to stick with 58 one more time if you don't mind.
So would I. All right, you go first.
Well, I would say I think the other thing that stands out, going back to actually 1950, is the role that kind of race has played in Brazilian soccer, or played at least in the moment. That 1950 failure, you had 2 black players, specifically the goalkeeper Barbosa, who was blamed for that one. And it wasn't just, the goalkeeper made some mistakes. It was more so like racially motivated criticism of a black player.
Yep.
And that stuck with the team and kind of stuck with Brazil's identity, because if you look at Brazil historically, I think part of Pele's story is connected to race and society in Brazil. The last South American country to outlaw slavery, Pele, I believe, was only 3 generations removed from slaves. His parents, or great-grandparents, I guess it would be, were slaves. So I think you have to consider that when then you go to 1958, and here is this 17-year-old black teenager who's crying after winning the World Cup, and he became this kind of figure to Brazil and to the world as a whole.
And then he becomes the face of the team as they win the 62 World Cup.
Yep.
They don't win the 66 World Cup, but then they famously win the 1970 World Cup, and Pele's the face of the team each and every time. I guess we'll talk more about those tournaments later.
We can say this now, though. I would say that it is a strange thing, and I promise this is not me just trying to be this revisionist history person, but you're right, he's the face of the team, and yet for 58, as you said, there's people who score more goals. 62, he gets injured. By all accounts, that's Garrincha's team that wins that World Cup. 66, he gets kicked, he gets injured. If they don't win,
kicked out of the tournament, but in a literal sense, not in the administrative sense.
And so in 1970, it's this team that comes together and congeals and is one of the best Brazil teams ever, if not best teams ever of all time. But again, it's not necessarily Pele carries this team and scores 40 goals in the tournament and everybody else is just kind of hanging on. He's surrounded by very good players, but you're right, he remains the face of those teams.
And I think part of the reason, this connects to my next reason why Pele is so well known, is that he was very famous, very fast, very young.
Yep.
Right? So we mentioned 1958 World Cup, he's 17. He'd only made his debut for his Brazilian team Santos, the season before?
Yeah.
So 1957, he gets his debut season. 1958, he scores a ton of goals. I think he scores 80 goals across all competitions plus exhibitions for Santos.
Unless you ask Pele, in which case he scored 6,000.
Well, I think Pele would say that the ones in friendlies were official. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then 1958... he's famously winning the World Cup. And then he's famous for another 20-something years beyond, literally 20 years beyond that, right? He's a famous soccer player. So it's almost like there was no build-up to Pele's career, right? There was no a lot of players maybe get their debut at 18, 19, 20 and don't get famous globally till 23. Pele was straight to the top of the charts in 1958 and stayed there for 20 years.
He did.
That's why he has such name recognition.
So I want to ask you this then. How much of his time at Santos do you think factors into that sort of exploding onto the spotlight and then staying there for a good long while? Because I feel like Santos also are a big part of what makes Pele Pele today.
Why do you think Santos is a big part of what makes Pele Pele today? That's a genuine question. I don't know the answer to that question.
So he plays for Santos for 18 years. In that time, 24 major trophies, 2 Copa Lib titles. That's decent.
Yep. But Copa Libertadores is the Champions League, essentially, of South America, for those who don't know.
Yes. Thank you very much. But because of that kind of attacking formation that we talked about with 1958... 4-2-4. It became this thing that people wanted to see. And so they wanted to see this Brazilian goal-scoring machine. Santos became a part of that. So you have Santos almost as a like ambassadors for Brazil going around the world, playing this incredibly exciting soccer, playing all these different friendlies. Pele is there, so he's traveling to countries all over Europe and wherever else in the world. And so people that might not otherwise be exposed to a Brazilian national team or a Brazilian club team, let alone, are suddenly watching this team score a bunch of goals against their local team, and Pele is right there doing a lot of it.
Yeah.
So it's almost like he went on this tour to be an ambassador for Brazilian soccer, but in a lot of ways became an ambassador for Pele.
Yeah, I get that. I think that's true. But I also think maybe one of the reasons that his time at Santos is so key to Pele's massive, massive fame is that he was able to score a lot of goals for Santos.
Yes.
Because of the way Brazilian soccer was structured during that time.
Let's talk about it.
So during his career, they do create the National League, right? But for the first few years, there, and as part of the season going forward, there is the state championship, the Sao Paulo state championship, right? Which is very competitive. It still is very competitive, but there are also some not so good teams in there as well, right?
Yes.
So he's able to stay in that league and essentially, this sounds disrespectful when I say it, but pad his numbers because he can rack up a lot of goals in the Sao Paulo state championship, right? So, and especially if you're then someone else around the world, you maybe don't get to see too much footage of Pele, but you can see the numbers. You can see him scoring just tens and tens of goals every single season.
And compounding that, because you're absolutely right when it comes to like the Brazilian opposition he was playing, Jonathan Liu, Liew, I'm taking this quote from him, Pele played more than 100 games in 1959, including 15 in 3 weeks on a tour of Europe. By the early 1960s, he was regularly playing 3 times a week with extensive traveling in between. So not only is he beating up on teams in Brazil, he's playing these exhibition games against maybe some comparable quality teams, but a lot of lower level teams are not as good, and especially in an exhibition, maybe they're not quite as focused on defense as they might be otherwise.
Yeah.
So he's able to play all these games, get all this exposure, get all these minutes, and get, most importantly, all those goals.
So, okay, I don't want to do Pele a disservice by just talking about numbers.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the player.
Sure.
So, as part of researching for this episode, I've watched a lot of, Pele playing soccer.
Yeah.
And what strikes me the most is that he genuinely has everything.
Absolutely.
Right? I don't want to get into like hyperbole, but 2-footed, fast, balance, right? People could not knock him over. He has a lot of feints and stops and step overs, right? So he's very hard to catch essentially because he's got some good tricks and changes of direction that are really hard for defenders to compete with. But then powerful, accurate shooting. I am in awe of the striking of the ball that we've seen from Pele. The 1958 World Cup final goal I talk about, where he lifts it over the Swedish defender's head, but then hits it as it comes down. It is so accurate and so perfect and so fast and powerful into the corner. That's one example of what Pele could do.
Yeah, and if you want further examples, there's a great YouTube video, Pele, he did it 50 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw this one.
No.
But it basically cuts between modern players doing modern moves that we kind of identify with them. So it's Ronaldo doing like the roll and then step over again.
Yeah.
And then it cuts to Pele doing that. And it cuts to Pele doing all of the many moves. The one that stood out most memorably to me was I think you hate it, but it's like the Neymar move where he'll kind of just stand upright with the ball in front of him and the defender in front of him, and he'll just wait for the defender to do something.
It depends on the situation, but yeah.
Pele definitely did that. You can see that clip too. But so to see all of these modern players doing it, to see that Pele did it in the 50s and 60s, but also then to remember the equipment and materials he was utilizing in that moment, how heavy that ball probably was if there was even like a tiny amount of water around.
Yeah.
It makes it that much more impressive, not just what he can do with the ball, but what he gets the ball to do. To your point, the power behind those strikes for what had to be a very heavy and uncomfortable soccer ball.
Oh, and can you imagine being on the receiving end of one of those if you're a goalkeeper? Then the other thing is, obviously he gets a lot of goals because he has kind of a poachery instinct as well, right? So he probably could have just been a goal hanger and scored a bunch of goals. But he also, throughout his career, like say 1970, I think he can come a little deeper and connect play. The 1970 goal that Carlos Alberto scores is Pele just receiving the ball and cleverly laying it off to him. So it's a little bit like he can basically do a little bit of everything attacking, even weirdly win a bunch of balls in the air for a man who's 5'8".
I mean, that's incredibly impressive.
Yeah.
And I've got some more stuff to say about his physical attributes as well as his technical ability. But first, I feel like maybe we should take a break to talk about today's sponsor.
Today's Soccer 101 is sponsored by Postmates. Pele always delivered. Postmates delivered too.
You beat me to it. I have my own Pele joke about how he would like deliver the ball into the net. And he didn't even need an app to do it. Yours is better.
Postmates will deliver food, drinks, anything you want, anything that can be bought from a store pretty much, Postmates will deliver it to you.
And the key thing there, you don't even need to know where the store is, which is very nice because, like, do you ever do, well, you don't because you don't drive, but like, I'll do that thing where I know I want food, and so I'll look at like, I'm on the highway, like, I'm looking at my route home, there's not much on the way, like, I guess there's this place nearby, and you sort of have to do the geography math almost.
Oh, wow.
But with Postmates,
your life sounds complicated.
You can just click, and it's delivered right to your door. You don't even have to know where things are.
You really do click. Yep. If you download the app, which you can get for free for iOS or Android, once you open it up, you can browse all kinds of local food establishments.
You browse,
I was trying to think of a synonym for restaurants. You can browse local restaurants.
or businesses.
Yeah.
If you're getting the goods delivered, simply download the app for iOS or Android for free. Once you make your delivery, you can track it in real time. It shows up at your door. You just take the thing, go back inside. No money, no anything like that. I mean, obviously you have to pay for it, but not in person, which is a nice, you don't even have to do the awkward, like, do I tip $2 in cash? I don't know what to do here. Do I do $4? Don't even have to worry about that.
And which days of the year is this unavailable?
I think just like every other one, right? No, it's every day. 24/7, 365.
And 366 on leap year.
If you've done a terrible job in your Christmas preparations and people in your house really like food, you can have that delivered on Christmas Day and be like, I totally planned it all out.
Wouldn't that be a giveaway that you did it last minute, that Postmates are delivering the Christmas presents?
Don't give away the secrets, Daryl. People don't need to know that. They just need to know that Postmates can provide that service.
Let's hope your extended family doesn't listen to this ad.
Yeah.
Because then they'll know.
Uh-oh.
Then they'll know. So once you've downloaded the app...
When they get a lot of stuff from CVS in their stockings, they'll know.
Oh, from the as seen on TV aisle.
Yeah.
Thanks, Taylor. My wife would love that, by the way.
Or from the last season's discount items from CVS, which is always a plus.
Star Wars, The Force Awakens.
Exactly.
For a limited time, Postmates is giving our listeners $100 of free delivery credit that you can use within the first 7 days. To start getting those free deliveries, you just download the app, you use the code SOCCER.
That's code SOCCER for $100 of free delivery credit for your first 7 days when you download the Postmates app. So if this episode has put you in the mood for like Brazilian fare, you can look on Postmates, see if you've got a restaurant in the area. If you do, they will deliver it to you because anything you need, anytime you need it, Postmate it.
All right, so Postmates, a great sponsor on today's show.
We very much appreciate them. Thank you very much to Postmates for sponsoring this episode of Soccer 101. I want to get back to Pele's physical attributes because, as you said, he is not this like 6'2" giant you would expect to win everything.
He's 5'8".
Right. There was a New York Times article when he first signed for the Cosmos.
He's probably smaller now as he gets older.
Yeah, that would make sense. There's a New York Times article when he first signed for the Cosmos that like, kind of doctors ran him through a series of medical tests. Again, I think this may have been sponsored by Pepsi, so big old grain of salt there. But what they found was that his beats per minute while training in his heart, not his Beats by Dre, were 56 to 58 beats per minute. The norm is 90 to 95 when you're training. His peripheral vision was 30% greater than a normal athlete's. He also had greater aerobic capacity, which meant he could recover faster. But the big one, to your point about winning the aerial challenges, was that like I think it was the way his muscles had formed. Part of that was because of his feet, that he had like very strong heel bones, so they kept him flatter, which meant he could accelerate faster. But he kind of had...
Sounds like some Pepsi science.
It does. But the thing that I think I do kind of believe, is he has that Ronaldo ability to hang in the air. That basically, because he could jump higher, he could stay in the air longer. And if you go back and look at some of the clips of him winning headers, the center back who he's out jumping jumps at the exact same time, but that center back comes down while Pele is either still rising or still hanging in the air, and thus winning that header.
Lifted towards the heavens just a little bit longer than everybody else.
Yeah. Excuse me. The flat feet, parallel feet and strong bone in the heel were natural shock absorbers, is what the New York Times wrote in the 70s.
I want to talk about Pele in Europe.
Sure.
Okay, so one of the reasons I think Pele is so revered is... weirdly, the fact that he never came to play in Europe in the 60s, which is when we would have assumed that he would have come over. I think the fact that he never sort of came and let's say he played for Manchester United and had a bum season, you know what I mean? And then everyone's like, he's just another human. You know what I mean? I think because he didn't come and play in Europe, especially for European soccer fans, he still has this weird sort of, it's almost like a what might have been, or a we didn't get to see him mythology around him. And it's a bit like how you don't see the shark in Jaws makes the shark scarier. I think there's a little bit of that going on with Pele in Europe.
I agree. But I think it's also worth noting that like it wasn't that uncommon for people not to go and play in Europe at this time period. Because I think if you're new to soccer, if you've only started watching in the last couple of years, you might think, oh, of course, Brazilians have always been like played in the richer leagues around the world. Yeah. And it's worth noting that like at the time, no, they really didn't. It wasn't until much later that you had Brazilians start going to other leagues.
So when did it start, you know?
I mean, yeah, so the first time you have...
you've done the research.
I have.
Look at you.
The first time you have Brazilians on like playing in a World Cup but not playing in the domestic league, is 1982. You have two players.
That's 20-something years later, right?
Yeah. But then, I mean, really, when it starts to get to like only half is around 1990. Yeah. And by the time you get to like what we have today, where it's more of like only a few.
Where the majority of the Brazilian players play in Europe.
Yeah, 2006, 3 of the 23 were playing in Brazil, everybody else abroad.
So in hindsight, it's unrealistic to expect Pele to have moved to Europe.
Yes, exactly.
The weird thing is that it was even rumoured that he was going.
That is very well said. So yeah, that's one part of it. And then the other thing I wanted to get to was going back to those exhibition games where he gets all the goals. We're still talking about an era where you don't have obviously you don't have the internet, but you don't have nearly as much coverage, nearly as much written about, especially from country to country.
Yeah.
So a lot of these teams going up against Pele in these exhibitions or in the World Cup are kind of experiencing him and Brazil for the first time. Mm-hmm. So if you're used to playing the WM in a very traditional style of soccer and all of a sudden here's this 4-2-4, you're kind of overwhelmed. Pele bringing in different skill sets also helps overwhelm you. But if he were playing in England and playing against all these teams or playing in Sweden or France or Italy or wherever, they get used to him. You see him on a regular basis. It becomes less of this explosive threat that comes out of nowhere and more of a, oh, it's Pele, let's foul him a whole bunch.
I saw a few quotes. I'm not going to read all of them. I'm going to read one. Quotes from players who sort of faced him for the first time because they'd never faced him before and were very, very impressed with who they were up against.
Do you have any specifics?
I have one specific one. You may have the same one somewhere in your notes.
I don't.
So in the 1970 World Cup final, which Brazil win, they beat Italy. The man tasked with marking Pele, imagine being told you've got that job, is Tarcísio Burgnic, is the Italian defender. He said, I told myself before the game, he's made of skin and bones just like everyone else. I was wrong.
That does feel like the thing of the stories of people deliberately injuring themselves to get out of the draft in Vietnam.
Yeah.
I feel like if you told me I had to mark Pele, I'd be like, well, I'm cutting off a pinky toe now.
Fake some back pain. I think faking back pain is the way to go.
It's probably the way to do it nowadays. Yeah,
okay,
you're right.
Give me another. I've got some reasons left. You got any more reasons why Pele endures?
Yeah, I do. It's one that we've kind of already alluded to previously, but I think it's also that he was in the right technological time period because we talked about 58, first international TV coverage. 1970, a lot of people say, and I promise this isn't just me saying, people say, I've seen this written many times, that 1970 team is the best World Cup team we've ever seen.
That Brazil team?
Yes, yeah. Excuse me. And there's an argument to be made that it's the first to be broadcast worldwide in color, and so people could watch...
Wait, the entire World Cup is the best World Cup people have seen?
No, that 1970 Brazil team specifically. But it's because suddenly you're seeing this Brazil team, which is already very vibrant and exciting, but to see them actually in color, it really...
You see the canary yellow.
To see that goal that he scored in 58, it's an amazing goal, but it is, for whatever reason, because it's black and white, it doesn't quite strike you the same way that 1970 with like the Technicolor and it's all right in your face. Yeah. The way when that ball goes in the back of the net, you see the ball hit the net. It's a definite contrast in color. It just stands out that much more.
I think maybe people as well don't realize how affected they are by sort of bright colours and how much we as people like them.
It's an important thing.
There's that whole thing of how maybe the Premier League is more popular because it's broadcast in quite bright hues.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It might be the same thing with the 1970 World Cup, which people remember fondly in general, and specifically that team.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that definitely helps it stand out. And then, as we've said, it's the era before everybody knew everybody. It's the era before everybody knew what to expect from these national teams. And so this 1970 Brazil team coming in, it really was about figuring out how do we get these 11 players on the field at the same time. And that's what they had to do is like move it around and change this and put him here and put that guy there and play a left back who's actually a left forward, but we want him on the field. And that I feel like nobody kind of knew this juggernaut that was about to be unleashed at the 70 World Cup until it was. And because it's just so vividly stands out, that golf and class, it stands out that much more in our memories.
For me as well, in terms of Pele's career and longevity and the way we think about him, I think the fact that Pele bookends his World Cup career with this 1970 World Cup win just makes him feel more ever-present, right? He's 58, 62, 66, and then 70. It's like a nearly 30-year-old Pele. I time of the 1970 World Cup. So he's not just like this, like it's like Kylian Mbappe won it in 2018, but we don't know if in 2030... Kylian Mbappe will be winning the World Cup again.
Exactly.
But if he does, then he's had this magnificent career. That's what Pele had. It's bookended by 58 World Cup, 70 World Cup. So you see young Pele win it as the junior on the team, and you see older Pele win it as the senior member of that 1970 Brazil team. That all feeds into the legend, in my opinion.
I'm just going to throw this out there. Decent career. And I'll say it also factors for me that we're talking about him in the present tense because he's still alive. Mm-hmm. And I think
at time of recording.
But I think that is important to note that you look at players Garrincha, Cruyff, Best. They're still talked about, obviously. People still know those names. Mm-hmm. But I do think that if the person is still alive and still around, it keeps them in your memory that much, that we still see footage of Pele. I mean, and there are the stories of him being hospitalized and needing medical attention, and it brings him back to the forefront. I think once a person passes away, it's not necessarily easier, but it tends to be the case that you kind of start to forget about them a little bit more, and they're sort of resigned to history in a way that makes them more of a historical figure than a contemporary figure.
Interesting. Okay. The other thing I have
Not that Pele's out there scoring goals still for Brazil, but you get my point.
The numbers. So the official total is that Pele scored 1,282 goals in 1,363 games.
Checks out. It's rock solid math.
It really doesn't, right? Because a lot of those goals include exhibition games, friendly games, mm-hmm. maybe even some youth team games. Mm-hmm. From what I've read, if you only actually take Sao Paulo State Championship, other official Brazilian tournaments, international goals, which he scored, 77 and 92? Those are official, still not bad. And goals he scored for the New York Cosmos in the NASL. It's about 400 less, right? It's about 400 fewer. But that's still around 800 goals, right? So his actual total, if you just did it officially, is still incredible. But there's this inflation up to 1,282.
All right, so it's a little bit inflated, a little bit, I would say. I guess you would say as well. My question for you then is, as with a lot of things about Pele, it seems like the myth kind of takes on this greater significance and becomes the reality. So do you have any idea where this came from, why they started to get inflated?
I do know that in 1969, someone in Brazil noticed that if you added up all of the goals you could find from Pele, the total was like 990. And so they began this chase for what they called O Millésimo, which is the 1,000th, right? So they wanted to have this narrative of Pele has scored 1,000 goals. Mm-hmm. So I think, I don't know how much of a Pele creation it is, but he does often tout the 1,282 number himself afterwards. But at the time, I think there was a Brazilian media creation of his closing in on 1,000. So I think it sort of became official, even though a lot of those goals are in tours and exhibitions and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to mention while we're talking about those exhibition games again was, do you know why they played so many exhibition games? Because I don't know if this is necessarily the exact reason, but I have to imagine it factored in.
I assume because they could make a lot of money from it's almost like a traveling circus with with Pele as the main event, the main feature.
They would be Santos. They would also be Pele. After 1958, when European club offers started coming in,
to buy him,
he renegotiated with Santos to get half of any fee for exhibition matches played abroad. His money manager then squandered all that money until 1966. But that was why a big part of it was that he wanted to make more money. And to be honest, that is also a part of Pele. I equate him with Michael Jordan a little bit, and there are the contemporary theories, not trying to be controversial here, not trying to be accusatory, but that Michael Jordan is in that psychopath realm in terms of some psychopaths are murders that you hear about on podcasts. Some run Fortune 500 companies because it's about wanting to win all the time, being super competitive, focused on what makes you the best.
Isn't that sociopath?
I mean, maybe. I feel like I read this.
One of the paths.
It's in the Psychopath's Dilemma or whatever, The Face of the Psychopath or whatever that book is, The Mask, something like that. But all that is to say that I think you can take this sort of idea about yourself and become, I want to be the best player in the world. I will be the best. So it's going to be, I'm going to work all the time at that. And you look at Pele and that's what his life is. It's number one is religion. He was a devout Catholic, remains a devout Catholic his entire life. But number two, I think, is Pele. And it's about everything he does, he goes in 110% on, as much as you hate that number. But it's the stories of the Puma sponsorship where he stops and ties his shoes so the camera has to show off his shoes.
Yeah.
That's
the 70 World Cup final.
Yeah, that's a Pele thing, though. It's the idea of, in this moment, I'm going to do the thing that's required to make Puma become this well-known international brand, and it's pursuing sponsorships whenever they're available. He has sponsored everything because I think he wants to be the biggest merchandiser in the world as much as the top goal scorer in the world.
He wants to be the best at it.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing because I don't think...
He can merchandise with both feet.
There we go. Because the thing that I really have come, and I say all that not that sounds maybe vaguely critical, but it's actually the thing that has made me the most interested in Pele is that I think you can have kind of two mindsets if you're a professional athlete. It can be that, I want to win and score goals, but I'm here to have fun. I'm here to live my life. I think that's the Garrincha model. I think that's the Ronaldinho model. And then I think you have other people who it's about, I want the records, I want the glory, I want the history.
I want to be the best.
I think that's Ronaldo. I think that's Pele. And so with that...
Mia Hamm, I believe, is like that as well.
I would agree. And I would say, though, that you can't just switch that off. And so you kind of, if you want this person who's going to always try to find a way to win, they don't just switch that off when it comes to personal life or how they talk about soccer or who they talk about. They're always going to be competitive.
Okay, but here's the thing I want to ask about. You mentioned him not going to Europe and doing those tours instead, right? Yeah. Smart negotiating to get that money. I'm assuming you did the same research as me and you saw multiple references to Pele didn't leave Brazil and go and play in Europe because the Brazilian government declared him a national treasure through an act of Congress. And I also know that you are not fully convinced that actually happened.
No, I'm not.
I really want to talk about this.
Let's do it. Because there are many stories about it. There are many stories about how the Brazilian president was very unpopular and knew that keeping Pele in Brazil would make him even more popular, Pele, but also he the president. And the thing is, if you read these articles and people regurgitate this story, if you look at the links that like link to the history of it, it's always another story that talks about it that links to another story that eventually links to a defunct, no longer existing webpage. I have never been able to find anything. If it was a bill passed by the Brazilian Congress, you would assume that there is a physical written out bill somewhere. Yeah. Haven't been able to find that. Haven't been able to find any official documentation that this ever occurred, except for an interview maybe I think it was like in 2014 with Pele talking about this. And it's the first time I've ever heard him say sort of like, oh, like it was suggested that I was this national treasure and they couldn't bear to let me go, so they didn't let me leave. And in that moment...
Wouldn't he have thought that? Well, shouldn't he have thought... If it was true, he should have caused absolute mayhem to make sure he could leave if he wanted to.
See, that's the thing. Similar, there's a Marca interview from a few years ago about does he regret never playing for Real Madrid? And he says, I didn't play outside of Brazil because I was very, very happy at Santos. I had the best 15 to 20 years of my life there. I had plenty of other proposals, and not just from Real Madrid either, but I was okay where I was. One offer came from Juventus, another from Napoli, even from Germany to play alongside Beckenbauer at Bayern Munich. I wavered a little bit, but I was enjoying my best moments at Santos, who, let's not forget, were also a great team.
So I'm with you. I think he just wanted to stay at Santos, and he may have been declared a national treasure. Yeah. That may be true. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that actually prevented him from leaving Brazil.
No, I don't think so either. And I think
otherwise he was like a kidnapped hostage.
Yeah. And that and then there's the story about like Kissinger having to go negotiate to get him to be permitted to go play for the Cosmos. And Kissinger, I believe, says he did go down there, but that may well have been just because there was so much money tied up in Pele that Brazil wanted to make sure that there was going to be some sort of remuneration or some sort of benefit to them to let Pele go. But all that is to say, for me, forgive me, that like. The interesting thing for me is that it's the line between like fact and fiction with Pele. It's blurred, and it is always kind of in between. You can understand how, oh yeah, he definitely taught himself geometry because that's what allowed him to score goals. That's a claim he made. But you could also see how maybe he just got really good at scoring goals, and somebody once said like he could be the leading like geometric mathematician or whatever it would be, geometrist.
Geometry guy.
Yeah, geometry guy, exactly. And then he was like, I could be. I studied geometry. And like you can see how those myths get created, even if they're not necessarily of his own creation.
Yeah, I think that's true. Okay, I want to move us on to suggest that maybe one of the reasons he is so famous is that move to the United States. Mm-hmm. I mentioned at the top of the show, my wife's father doesn't know soccer players, knows Pele. I think it's because he came here in 1975, played for the New York Cosmos, and essentially because of the New York Cosmos being related to Warner, being very media savvy, created a lot of attention around Pele and around the New York Cosmos.
I mean, yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, oh, yeah. I mean, I won't even go into the numbers, but you can find them all about the increase in attendance, both for NASL as a whole, but for the Cosmos in particular.
Mm-hmm. And the decrease after he leaves. I mean, the league folds 2 years after Pele leaves.
Exactly. And all the goals scored and everything else that he brought to the table, and why the Cosmos remain the Cosmos to this day. There's a reason why you still get all of the documentaries and footage of the New York Cosmos to this day, and it starts with Pele.
Once in a lifetime. lifetime. Yeah. That is the documentary to watch about the Cosmos, by the way.
Absolutely.
If you want to get deeper into that. But yeah, I look at it as like the one place that at the time really didn't care about soccer. Pele went there and made at least some people care about soccer. You could even argue that what we have today is a result of that sort of first push in the 70s where Pele was the main face of it.
Yeah, because I went back and watched his first game, or like the highlights of his first game for the Cosmos, and it's the same vibe as when Beckham first played for the Galaxy. You can just hear the clearly lots of children screaming. They're just excited. He's on the ball. Anytime he gets the ball, you can hear just the crowd noise increase dramatically. It reminds me of that Beckham. Everybody just wants to see what this person is capable of.
Yeah.
The only difference being that there was not very good security. So when Pele scores that first goal, I believe like the entire crowd runs up and hugs him. There's like 50 people hugging him on the field.
Okay, I mean, I feel like we've bounced through all kinds of reasons why Pele is so famous, why he's the name everybody knows. Do you have any more to add before we wrap up this episode of Soccer 101?
No, I just want to say that like I think it would be not a fun listen for us to just spend 30 minutes talking about, that goal and that goal and that move and that move. You can find all that footage. But I would say that is like really a huge part of it. And I just want to reiterate that. Watch that he did it 50 years ago video. Watch some of the video of him playing and just know that nobody was capable of doing what he was doing at that time period.
Yeah.
And that, again, is why he's such a like revolutionary, iconic figure in global soccer.
And it could even be stuff that maybe he's seen someone else do in the Brazilian league,
absolutely.
but then he does it at a World Cup.
Yeah.
So you see it first. So I'm thinking specifically of the he doesn't score it. I wish he'd scored it. The move against the Uruguayan goalkeeper, the 1970 World Cup, where the ball goes through and Pele deliberately overruns the ball and goes the other way, and the keeper goes with him. The ball goes the other side. Then Pele runs around and meets the ball on the other side of the keeper, but then pulls it just wide, right? So I've never seen that before. Before I saw Pele do that, I wasn't around in 1970, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The earliest footage I've ever seen of someone running the opposite way to the ball to fool the goalkeeper or a defender.
You just jogged my memory. I believe he does that same thing in Escape to Victory. It's how he scores against Sylvester Stallone.
Maybe Michael Caine told him that one.
But I just remembered that he does that thing, or maybe it's just like a step over and Stallone dives to the other corner and then he just casually passes it into the other corner. Yeah. Either way, again, he's in major motion pictures. That probably is also a big part of why we still know Pele.
Okay, you ready to wrap this up?
Yep.
All right, so there, a whole show about Pele. I really enjoyed that.
Me too.
If you enjoyed it, please leave Soccer 101 a review. Please share it with a friend. Leave it a review on iTunes. Subscribe in iTunes or however you listen. Also, if you've never heard of us before and you enjoyed this, we want to let you know we have another show, the Total Soccer Show. It's been around since 2009. It is a more sort of daily, up-to-date, what happened today type soccer show. So please go and find that if you haven't already.
I concur.
And if this is the first episode of Soccer 101 that you've found, please feel free to scroll up and down the feed. There's no order that you have to listen. Any soccer topic you want to get into is in the Soccer 101 feed. Go for it.
I concur again.
All right, I've been Darryl Grove.
I've been Taylor Rockwell.
We'll talk to you again next time.